There is a massive winter storm in Texas, and because of the fact that Texas has its own power grid that's deregulated, highly privatized, and inefficient, people are left without power, without water that's safe enough to drink. In fact, most people are being told to boil their water because they're worried that it's unsafe, but it's kind of hard to do that when you don't have any electricity. But former Texas Governor Rick Perry thinks that his opinion still matters and is speaking on behalf of the millions of Texans who are now dealing with the ramifications of privatized utilities. And so he says this: those watching on the left may see the situation in Texas as an opportunity to expand their top-down radical proposals. Texans would be without electricity for longer than 3 days to keep the federal government out of their business. So essentially what he's saying is, Texans would rather go without water or power during a brutal winter storm just to own the libs, okay? Just so they don't have to deal with any regulations that would actually protect them from what they're experiencing right now. Yeah, and so by the way, so Texas's power grid, we've talked about it quite a bit on the show lately as a result of these rolling blackouts that are taking place. But it's run by the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCOT, and it occupies a unique distinction in the United States in that it does not cross state lines, but more importantly, it's not under the oversight of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And Texas allows these companies, these energy companies, to essentially regulate themselves. They get to decide how they distribute energy. They get to decide all of that. So former Governor Rick Perry also said, try not to let whatever the crisis of the day is take your eye off of having a resilient grid that keeps America safe personally, economically, and strategically. I mean, that grid keeps people so safe that dozens of people have already died in Texas as a result of this winter storm and not having the necessary electricity and power needed to keep your home warm. People are going to shelters right now in order to have access to a warm place. It's just been a complete and utter disaster. And Rick Perry's like, oh, we're really owning the libs, aren't we? Okay.
Yeah, a quick side note on this, and then I'm gonna read you some important quotes. Folks like Joe Rogan went down to Texas because they're like, I don't want any stinking government of California interfering with me. I'm gonna go to Texas where they got no government. How's that working out for you, Joe? I hope you're not complaining to the government right now, because #freedom. Okay, so
look, I thought about that too. Sorry, you opened that can of worms, so I'm gonna comment on it. I thought about that as well, and to be sure, I mean, clearly Texas has its issues. But let's also be real. California has serious issues as well. I mean, think about the power companies like PG&E that refuse to update its equipment because they want to cut costs. They want to make sure that they make as much profit as possible. And when downed power lines led to massive wildfires in the state, and the company had to deal with lawsuits, guess what Newsom did? He bailed the companies out. He bailed PG&E out. Taxpayers, meaning taxpayers did that. So, and by the way, obviously we have a huge homeless population here. There are all sorts of issues in California as well. So, I know that people want to point fingers, but let's also just be truthful about how right now there's a lack of effective governing in every state, and California is no exception.
No, but let's be clear. I'm pointing two fingers, okay? I'm not taking anything away. So first of all, it's one of the problems is underlying in both California and Texas, which is corruption. So PG&E was a giant donor to Democratic politicians, and then Democratic politicians bailed them out. They start fires nonstop. There's never any accountability. And by the way, what did Gavin Newsom do in California? Oh, we got a coronavirus pandemic. It's a great opportunity to serve my donors. So he gives a giant contract to Blue Shield, his #1 donor. So, and what did the governors of Texas do, including Abbott and Rick Perry? Nonstop corruption, nonstop deregulation of the fossil fuel industry. Who are their top donors? It's the same exact problem. But layered on top in Texas is the second problem of this so-called ideology where they say, oh, government sucks and we shouldn't have any. And then when government doesn't work and things break down and people start freezing to death and 16 people are already dead, they go, oh, can you believe it? It's AOC's fault. It's Green New Deal's fault. Green New Deal doesn't even exist. It's not in any legislation. AOC has nothing to do with Texas. No, you morons deregulated the industry. And this is so important, guys. You need to understand this. And Perry's still bragging about it. Oh yeah, we deregulated. We let the companies handle it instead of the government, man, because we believe in freedom in Texas. No, you believe in bribery in Texas. You deregulated so they could save costs. So when you deregulated, the government, there was no cops on the street. There's cops for you. If you're a minority, you're poor, you're middle class, cops will come crack down on you. But if you're a giant corporation that bought off the government through crony capitalism, no cops on the street. So why did this break down, guys? And Houston Chronicle explains this too. Everyone who has covered this explains it right if you're looking at the details, which is mainly fossil fuels froze, their pipes froze. That is where almost all of the energy comes in this case. And by the way, ERCOT actually plans for the wind turbines to slow down in the winter and for solar energy to slow down. They already had taken that into account. What they did not account for was a massive freezing of the lines. Why did that happen for natural gas, i.e. oil and gas? Why did it happen? Because they refused to insulate them to save money. So the crony capitalism bought them a bunch of corrupt Republican politicians, which they used to save money on insulating the pipes. So when it came to the situation where they needed them to not freeze, oops, it turns out the corruption led to you not having any power and freezing to death. So Abbott and Perry and all those guys can get rich and get more power. That's how politics works.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And for Perry to turn around and say, like, I'm gonna go ahead and speak on behalf of Texans and say that they prefer this over regulations that would have protected them from what they're experiencing right now. Like, it's so gross and insulting. And I know that the right-wing media echo chamber is pretty powerful and toxic and certainly somehow resonates with a lot of conservative voters. But I really hope that they're waking up to the reality of what crony capitalism forces them to go through at moments of crisis, not just with this winter storm, but with the pandemic, with everything that we've experienced over the last year alone should make it abundantly clear that this system is not working and it's only failing people.
So Rick Perry's basically Marie Antoinette here. So he says, well, if they can't have energy, why don't they have freedom instead? So yeah, Rick, you're incredibly wealthy because of all of your donors, supporting you, and you have all this power and you have all this privilege. And I'm positive you're not freezing to death. But the last thoughts of the 16 people who died wasn't, oh, thank God for my freedom.